Cybersecurity is once again in the headlines. That's after FNB confirmed that a technical error allowed for sensitive client information to be visible to other clients using the online loan application service. This included full names and ID numbers. Experts have warned that the lack of cybersecurity should be considered a key threat. But with the ongoing power cuts, how secure is your private cyber information? To unpack this, I'm joined by Gary Allemann, spokesperson for Master Data Management. Gary, thank you so much for your time this evening. So firstly, let's talk about this most recent security breach. Under the Protection of Personal Information Act that we all know as POPIA, organizations must inform the information regulator if they expose the personal information of data subjects to unauthorized third parties without their approval. But what about informing those individuals who've been exposed and whose security is now under threat? Is that part of their mandate?
Yes, so thank you for having me firstly. Absolutely, there's a requirement for organizations to inform both the regulator and the affected parties or the data subjects whose data has been compromised. But where GDPR, which is the European regulations, specifies a timescale of 72 hours to get that done, in South Africa, the law is a little bit more vague and effectively just says you have to do it within a reasonable period of time. So there's some interpretation as to how long you have to inform people.
Okay, so in this instance, we know that FNB has acknowledged the breach and is in the process of reaching out to its affected customers. What could happen from here, both to the affected clients in terms of their security threat and to FNB in terms of possible sanction?
Well, I think in terms of the potential clients, the first question is what data was compromised, and that's not 100% clear. Certainly, there was a risk that there might have been password information or other information of that nature. I would be thinking about changing my passwords if I was a client. Some of the other information that has been breached may well be publicly available already. So you have to make your own decisions as to what you think the risk is to you. From the bank's perspective, there's a reputational risk. I think we're seeing that tonight with this interview. I believe that the breach was reported by a customer, so there was already some unhappiness from a customer dealing with the organization, and then obviously the information regulator has the power to fine or take other action against the organization should they see fit to do so.
What are we seeing currently in South Africa in terms of such data breaches amid vast digital expansion and developments?
Well, the information regulator was actually quoted yesterday or the day before to say that since October last year, they've had over 500, I think she said the exact number was 568 breaches reported to them. And those are the ones that are reported. So you must assume that there are a number that have gone under the radar. So we only hear about these breaches typically when it's a large organization that the issue happens to. The challenge that you have is we're seeing a lot of expansion, particularly into digital, driven partly by COVID and the lockdown and the shift in buying patterns that have happened. But also there's a big focus in financial services and other industries on what they call digital products. So it's rolling out artificial intelligence models and those kinds of things. And possibly more attention needs to be paid to some of the less sexy foundational stuff that makes sure that problems like this don't occur.
Do you think load shedding has an impact on cybersecurity? Is that something that people should be worried about at all?
I don't think it's the primary concern. I would be worried about load shedding. Typically, these large organizations have got backups and take care of their security. But what they need to do is just consider a holistic approach. So there's been a lot of focus on blocking, firewalls, blocking external parties from gaining access to data. But in this instance, for example, it sounds like it was a website. It was open to people, and there was clearly some kind of issue with the way that was designed. And then they also need to consider, how do we protect data from internal staff that have too much access? So that's a real threat that's much more difficult to protect against than simply putting up a firewall.
From someone in cybersecurity, do you think we have sufficient protection laws and systems in place? Is the POPIA Act working and is it sufficient?
We actually have very good laws, ironically, because I think the perception out there is that maybe we don't. It's not just the POPIA Act. There are a number of laws that have been in place. For example, direct marketing. There's been issues around how you market to people for years, long before POPIA. The challenge we have is with enforcement. So at the moment, there's a battle between the information regulator and the Department of Justice as to who's got jurisdiction, where budgets come from, etc. So the information regulator, I think, is looking for examples, truthfully, to set some of the precedents and say what's right and what's wrong. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with this particular case. But 568 breaches in 10 months, that's a lot.
What more can South African individuals do to beef up their own security? I mean, in this instance, it's pretty much out of people's control. But are there things outside of the general practice of South Africans that we should all be sort of, learning and forcing ourselves to upskill?
So I think the biggest thing is to be conscious of security. People can be very glib about passing out personal information, particularly around passwords. A lot of these little quizzes you see on Facebook and other social media sites are actually phishing exercises where people are looking for the hints that you use to remember your password. Don't store the same or use the same password in multiple places. So use passwords in one place only and use secure passwords. And then just be conscious, if you get a phone call so the biggest risk with a breach of this nature, where possibly ID information and other identifying information has been taken, is that information may be used to try and impersonate you. So, you might notice a funny transaction on your credit card or something else happening. Just be conscious of what's going on with your financials and query anything that looks out of order.
Gary, on a lighter note, and before I let you go, the amount of things that we need passwords for these days is astronomical. You need a password to get into your phone just to get into the apps that you also need passwords for. And if you pass a certain age, remembering a different password for each app or each different tool is absolutely impossible. It doesn't just have to do with age, but changing passwords frequently for security makes it incredibly challenging. Is there a system that people inside cybersecurity use to remember these passwords?
So there are actually systems out there called password vaults, where you can store a bunch of passwords for different systems in a secure manner. But another fairly easy system is to pick something like a book that you really like and that you know a quote from, and just take the first letter from each word in that quote. That's pretty hard to hack. So if you have enough ideas in your head about literature or poetry, you can use some of those to give yourself pretty secure passwords.
Excellent. Thanks for that advice. That was Gary Allemann, spokesperson for Master Data Management, talking to us about the very serious issue of cybersecurity.